All right, well, welcome to our November 2020 MemLab Network webinar. And today we're going to be talking about collecting and visualizing data at your memory lab to evaluate yourself. So today I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to this topic, and then my colleague Laura Farley from DC Public Library's People's Archive. She's the digital curation librarian. Laura recorded about a 25-minute video on visualizing data. And then Laura's also here to answer any questions afterwards. So this is gonna be a short one, a pretty quick one, but really important stuff to start doing after you build your lab. So I'm mostly just going to be talking about collecting data, and I think that we all know about evaluating programs to a certain extent within our libraries. That is definitely something that is done. It depends on what degree it's done in each library, but it's something within the profession that is recommended, and there are some resources out there to help with it. But I want to get really specific about what we're doing for the Memory Lab, because when I first joined DC Public Library, there was a lot of data collection going on for certain things, and not necessarily for others that I found would tell me more about the lab, especially as I was learning about it. So we started collecting more, and that's something that I want to make sure that we don't miss in the process of, it's a lot of work to even build the lab, but then there's a lot of work that goes afterwards to collect data about the lab usage. So, and mostly, I mean, I said lab usage, but we're collecting data on the physical lab usage, definitely. But then also, if you're going to have any online resources that you are going to be giving your community. So if you're going to have a LibGuide like we have, which is totally fine, but any kind of website landing page that you might have for your lab, it is a good idea to collect data about that online resource. And then of course also the classes and events, right? So that three-tiered, or the three legs of the stool of what a memory lab actually is. You're collecting data on the physical lab, online resources, and then the programming, classes and events. So the type of data that you'll be collecting is the one that people typically talk about is the quantitative data. And I'm simplifying it here, but mostly that's numbers, right? That's how you think of it, like statistics and sort of hard and just fast numbers and definitive, consistent answers, right? And then there's qualitative data that you should be collecting, and that I think sometimes gets overlooked a little bit. And quantitative is about quantity, right? Numbers, and then qualitative is more about quality and about it's sort of more like one's numbers, one's words, but it's kind of actually more like feelings and senses. So what you feel about a program, or how you feel about the memory lab and using it, or the online resource, and how it looks, how it feels, how it makes you feel, if you're, what you see, what you hear, and what your experience is. So it's important not to forget about the qualitative. A lot of times I feel like we focus, when we're talking about data, on quantitative types of collecting, but they're both equally important. Okay, so as far as quantitative data goes, for the physical lab, one way that we collect that information, that type of data, is through Acuity, which is our scheduling software. And this is where, when people are filling out the form to make a appointment at the lab, they're filling out things like, what format are you going to be digitizing? So we're collecting that, which is an absolutely essential piece of information to know, is how many, so that's how we figured out that our VHS station, or VHS digitization is the most popular format out of our AV station. So and if you're going to have multiple formats, then you need to definitely keep that information. And I think it would be even better to go more granular too, and not just they're using the VHS station, but then are they bringing in VHS-C? Are they bringing in SVHS? Is it the slower speed VHS? So that's things that will really tell you more about where you need to put your money in the future. And like, if you have to get a new deck, what should we prioritize? If your community seems to have tons of slower speed VHS, then put your money in getting a deck that's going to help those people and help the majority of people. So there's other information that we get through the scheduling software, but it would be great to keep how long people are using the appointments, if they're staying for all of their 3-hour appointments. And then one thing that was really interesting, one of those things that I mentioned that when I first got to DCPL, that I had wished people had been collecting, but it doesn't really, you don't think of it right off the bat. So, we obviously, when people are using the scheduling software, it's really easy to keep track of how many appointments are being used, right? So, and that's regularly what we would report on, is like, well, the lab has been used for this many hours by this many people. But thinking about how powerful that might be, it's sort of like, okay, well, what is that compared to? I wanted to then know, well, how many appointments were there how much was the lab not being used, right? So being able to compare how much the lab was being used to how much it wasn't being used could tell you then, a lot about staffing, and about like, maybe your lab doesn't need to be open on Wednesdays, right? And then you can really focus your resources on your Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays, or whatever the information and the data is going to be telling you, but you have to then keep that information. So we did start, and it definitely has been telling us some really interesting things. Of course, then we moved the lab. So any of those changes, I think it's absolutely going to change once we moved it from one branch to another. So we're just going to have to start keeping that data again, and responding to what we get back. So for online resources, an easy way to kind of implement collecting quantitative data is Google Analytics. It's free. I can't say it's super easy. Like, I would say talk to your IT person to start figuring out how to collect the information from there. But mostly what you're looking for is how many people are coming to our website, right? And how long are they staying would be an ideal thing to know. What are they looking at the most if you have different pages? So for us, we keep that regularly. And once again, we see people are going to VHS resources the most. And then they're also typically going to how to build a memory lab, your own memory lab, that page. They go regularly. So that's one of the things that helped, we were able to use that data to prove, like, people want to know how to build a memory lab. So Google Analytics is just a free and easy way to implement that. But depending on where you have your website, there might be some other automatic statistic gathering parts of it, like WordPress and things like that you could use to gather just a minimal amount of quantitative data. And then for classes and events, typically that's just counting how many people are there, right? I think this is probably something that you all are very familiar with. And I think that that's also where we get hung up a bit, and where the quantitative data might not tell us a lot. If only 3 people come to our class, or one person, Jonathan, thank you. If one person comes to our class, but the qualitative data then could tell us that that person really enjoyed themselves, that thought that this was a great program. So you don't get that just from the quantitative. And this is why we must collect qualitative data. And obviously you want to collect this about each part of your lab, but then also I think a lot of these the things that I'm going to mention can be used for kind of the whole part of the lab. You just have to change the wording a little bit, right? So for your physical lab, one of the resources that we created was an exit survey. And this is just a Google document. I'm going to click out to it in a second. But it's just a Google Doc that you can make a copy and then put in your own words, your own logos and things like that, and then use. And it's given to folks when they're done with the lab, and hopefully they turn it in right there. So, and you can give it to them at the beginning as well and just say, hey, it would be great if after you're done, you could fill out this survey. And we got this more from, this is another thing that wasn't being collected initially, but then we talked with the Recollection Lab, that's what it's called, at the Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh. They have, it's basically a memory lab there. So they have an exit survey, and we based this on theirs. So yes, so here's the exit survey, right? Like you can just put in your own logo, and it's collecting demographic information. And then it's also collecting information about, you know, confidence with technology, if it's their first time in the lab, drop-ins, and then, you know, why are they there, suggestions for the lab, and an option for other comments that they can, you know, it's just sort of free form. So there is some collecting of like more quantitative data of like, you know, their age is pretty straightforward. But this, I would say that this is overall more of a qualitative data collection form. So once again, like this is for the physical lab, but I could also see that you might want to collect this demographic info and then experience info after classes too, maybe. So to go back to here. I don't think you guys can see my screen anymore. Stop and then reshare. There we go. Okay, so great. So that's the exit survey. This whole linking out thing seemed like such a good idea at the time. So that was the exit survey. And then for your online resources, I don't actually have anything as an example, because that's something that I guess we don't really do is, and I've seen this sometimes, is when you click away from or click out of your browser or away from a website, then a little pop-up comes on and says, how did you enjoy your, you know, our website basically, or would you take this little survey? And of course I never take them, unfortunately, but perhaps you want to implement something like that and maybe your IT already does. I haven't seen too many libraries do that, but it's an option. And then classes and events, this is once again something that I think is more put out there in the library world, because programming is so important in public libraries, that evaluation is something that there's been a lot of studies on and a lot of resources out there. So this form that I'm clicking out to is a template, once again, that I created, and I created this using the project outcome, which is it's just one of these resources for librarians to create their own program evaluations. And also they have a lot of webinars, free webinars that they put on about evaluation and things like that. I really recommend that you check out project outcomes, for just future thoughts and like learning on this information or on this topic. So you'll also see that this is pretty similar to the survey that I send out after every webinar that we have. So this is basically, and it's really short. That's the beauty of this. 6 questions. And of course, right down here, I give project outcome a little bit of a shout out. So, and basically like, you just ask them about how they feel more knowledgeable, more confident, intend to apply what you learned, more aware of resources, and then like free form asking about the program and learning. So that's and that would be something that you give after the class or event, and have them turn it right back in. So evaluation form for classes and events, and then for all of these aspects of for the whole part of the memory lab, I think that you can absolutely once again you can mix and match with these, and sort of like maybe use some elements of your exit survey and pop that into your evaluation form after classes and events to collect more demographic info. It's all about what you want in your qualitative data that you're collecting. So for all of them though, I'd really recommend that you watch this webinar. It's going to play automatically, so I'm ready to pause it. This webinar.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So everyone,
see,
welcome.
Yeah, so this is a webinar that we did, probably 2018 is when we did that. 2019, February 2019. And this is with Michelle Caswell, Dr. Michelle Caswell at the UCLA Community Archives Lab. And this is all about the toolkit that they made assessing the effective impact of community archives. And it's really, it's a an hour long, but I think it's really interesting because we're kind of talking about the project, about community archives, about assessment and qualitative data, and how to use it. Then also kind of like applying that to, and the ways that memory labs are kind of like community archives, not exactly, but how there's so much overlap. And then going back to my slides here, I used that, the toolkit that they had, which is great. You should check out the toolkit as well. And I created this form for you guys that, basically I just changed a lot of the wording and just, and so I said, based on UCLA Library Community Archiving Assessing Impact Toolkit. But like I basically just changed where it said community archives and put memory lab. Oh, there was a little bit more of nuance there, but it's basically questions to ask folks. And the toolkit goes way more into like how to like really implement this. And to ask these questions and to schedule these interviews and things like that. It's so detailed, and there's a lot of really great information in the toolkit. So that's also something you should check out, and that I'll provide a link to. But so these are all questions that you can ask to gather a lot of information and data to assess the impact of your lab on your community. And once again, that can be for every aspect of the lab. The physical space, the online space, and then the classes as well. Or you can just ask them to only think about the physical space, but you just have to document that and note it. So lastly, I really recommend collecting as much information as possible, especially for me and for the Memory Lab Network project. Obviously, after this is all done, it's all up to you on what you collect, but please, for my sanity, for my work, and for this to be the Memory Lab Network project to be as much of a success, please collect as much as possible. We'll start seeing trends over time. That's one of the most impactful things about collecting this data. Absolutely, we're going to be learning from failures and successes, not just you learning from your own failures and successes, but if times 15 or times 14, once we start adding all this up together. So that's going to help us create a more sustainable model that then others can implement, and they don't have to worry about making as many of the same failures, really, and just modeling our successes. And then, as I think probably you may know, this is collecting this as much as possible information and data on your lab is going to be such an important tool for going to your administration for additional support, whether that's staffing and whether it's funding. It's also really, really important for creating annual reports. It's going to make your job much easier and make you look really good, which is great. And then if you're writing a grant proposal, you will have this information there ready for you. And then it will help you to gain additional funding, hopefully through grant proposals or foundations. And then if you already have a grant like we do, taking this information and bringing it back to the funder, IMLS, is really, really important. And so please, please help me in that endeavor. And along those lines, next up is going to be Laura's video, which is all about data visualization.
My name is Laura Farley, and I'm one of the digital curation librarians in the People's Archive here at DC Public Library. My job is to make our digital materials findable and accessible, but another part of my job is to collect departmental data and share insights with the rest of my team in a monthly report. About a year ago, Siobhan and I worked together to come up with a simple monthly report to use in the MemLab network that shows appointment use and walk-ins. From that, we've made a template that we'll share out with all of you to create your own reports. Today, we'll cover the best practices for formatting your data, some data visualization design basics, and then a demo on how to create a basic report in Google Data Studio with the template. First, I want to cover two terms that are sometimes used interchangeably, but are actually slightly different. Data visualization is what we'll be learning to do today. Data visualization takes a pile of data, like a spreadsheet full of numbers, and makes it into something that we can easily understand. Data visualization uses colors, shapes, and text to help us quickly identify trends, draw conclusions, and to inform decision-making. We see data viz everywhere. It can be as simple as a bar chart or as complex as an elaborate infographic. There are many tools that you can use to create data viz, from dedicated software like Tableau to features in a spreadsheet. Data analytics goes a step deeper than data viz. While they're similar in that data viz does require analysis and interpretation of your data, data analytics uses tools and algorithms to unearth more complex trends and patterns within the data. The output of data analytics may then be turned into data viz. Common file formats of data analytics outputs are CSV, XLSX, and JSON files. Analytics may be performed using a tool like Domo or by writing and running scripts in R and Python. So, data visualization takes a data set and makes it quickly understandable. Data analytics takes a data set and looks for trends and patterns. The output may then be used to create data visualizations. Today we're going to focus on taking the data set from the MemLab analytics spreadsheet and turning all those numbers into this much easier to interpret monthly report that helps us understand over time how many walk-ins the lab receives and how many available appointments are being utilized. Before we can start working on a visualization, we need a clean data set. There are lots of ways to collect and store data, and today I'm going to go over the basics of formatting data so that when you're ready, you can start building your own strong data sets. First, let's talk about headers, which is usually the first row of a spreadsheet. When picking what information to collect, stick to common parameters such as date, the number of attendees at something like an event, or maybe the name of a library branch where a service or program is being provided. Or for something like the MemLab, pick headers for something like drop-ins or appointments. Take time when you're setting up your data to be consistent with labeling, so pay attention to things like capitalization and only use letters, hyphens, and underscores. This may seem like an unnecessary step, but you never know what you're going to want to do with this data in the future or who you may want to share it with. These conventions are best practices in the data community because they will make the process of analyzing data with tools and scripts much more fluid when you get to that point. Most importantly, make sure you record all the header definitions and naming conventions in a workflow document. This will help your colleagues if you need to pass off the project in the future so that they don't have to try to read your mind. Let's talk about the term values, which is all the data you're collecting. Usually, this data will be in a form of numbers or text. Again, choosing standards and sticking to them are the key to making your data set easy to understand and analyze. Use established standards whenever possible, because really, who has time to reinvent the wheel? And you might as well adopt a well-reasoned standard. So for dates, use ISO standard 8601, which records the calendar date as year, month, day, with or without hyphens. For numbers, consider if it makes sense to use whole numbers or decimals. Maybe if you're recording time in minutes, you'll want to use decimals. Or maybe you're just recording a count, so you want to use whole numbers. For text, consider establishing a controlled vocabulary of repeated terms. This way, there's not going to be a variation in data entry that may cause an error in value calculation. You want to avoid empty fields as much as possible because a blank field may become an issue with more advanced analysis. Instead, choose a value for missing data and stick with it. Something like null, not applicable, or none. Just like with headings, record all your value standards and conventions in a workflow for future colleagues working with the dataset. And last, I want to mention file naming practices as a surprisingly powerful way to help you quickly find and understand any of your files. Like with headers and values, pick conventions that make sense for your organization and stick with it. There's lots of elements that can improve the sorting and findability of a file, like adding in a department or project name and a full timestamp. So, for example, adding MemLab to the beginning of all my files relating to MemLab will help them all sort together. Next, I might add presentations, so every presentation about MemLab is together. Then I'll add the presentation title. And finally, a timestamp of the last edit. Order your file names from general to specific for best sorting. I want to talk about timestamps because I personally think they're way more useful than versioning or relying on the date modified sort feature. Using a timestamp that follows year, month, day, and even an hour and minute if necessary is a much cleaner way of keeping track of versions than adding something like final or final, or really, this is the final file name. And avoid all special characters or spaces that may cause the file to corrupt over time. Instead, use hyphens, underscores, or camel case capitalizations. After you have a data set all formatted and ready to go, the next step is to choose a way to create visualizations. Like I mentioned at the start, there are many different apps and platforms and softwares where you can create data viz. I'm using Google Data Studio because it's free, it works directly with Google Sheets, it'll deposit a copy into my Google Drive, and it lets me easily create monthly PDF reports to share with my team. It's definitely not the most user-friendly, but for a free platform, it works well for basic reporting. There's also a large online community of users, and there's lots of shareable templates. Today we'll just be creating a basic report, but as you get more comfortable with Data Studio, the next step is to incorporate filters and learn to write custom fields using regex. There's lots of guides of how to do this available online. Let's talk about design basics. These charts provide the same information about the monthly number of page views on a website by new and returning users, but the one at the top is much harder to interpret. When picking a chart, consider who your audience will be and what their comfort level with reading and interpreting data visualizations is. Think about what you're trying to communicate, how to best distill that information down to a simple viz. For example, the chart on top makes the difference in user types very clear, but it's difficult to gauge the total number of page views, and it distorts the amount of returning users, which is seen in blue. Always think about how to make your visualizations more simplistic. Data Studio creates pretty simplistic charts and graphs as compared to a platform like Tableau, but there's still considerations to make your charts appear more streamlined. Most likely, you're going to give your visualization a title that will make your access label redundant. If it's not necessary to show a lot of numerical precision, Space out the tick intervals, and choose whole numbers over decimals. Declutter your charts by removing the grid lines and using data labels sparingly. Use callouts, scorecards, and color to highlight data as opposed to data labels. With Data Studio, you're pretty limited in what you can do with color, but when you're learning the basics, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like PowerPoint and Presenter, Data Studio provides themes and color palettes to help you coordinate your data visualizations. Keep your audience in mind. Depending on where the data is published, you may need to prioritize color accessibility, your library's branding, and the ability to print in grayscale. A good practice to gauge readability is to squint at your data viz to see if you can still interpret the content. It sounds silly, but it really works. Here you can see a few examples. On the top left, the yellow line graph is too light on the orange background, especially when you squint. On the right side, the two-tone green isn't too bad, but may be difficult to see on some monitors depending on their color settings. The blue provides greater contrast and is still reasonably readable in grayscale. Color can be used to help unify multiple charts and graphs on one report. Here you can see I have two bar charts on the right, one for scanning and one for AV. Although the dimensions are different, scanning versus AV, the elements are the same, meaning both charts are measuring the number of appointments used and not used. Adopting the same color for appointments used in green and appointments not used in blue simplifies the amount of information a user must interpret and signifies these measures are related. Color can also be used to separate different concepts in a group of data visualizations called a dashboard. When seen all together, the colors on this dashboard to the right help signal to the user how to read the different data. Let's look at the best practices for text and labeling your data visualizations. Especially when creating a dashboard, there's a lot for the eye to take in, so limit fonts and rely on tools like bolding to help direct the eye. Give your data visualizations strong labels that are descriptive and plain. I find it helpful to literally say out loud or write out what the chart is about. Most times, that's what your title will be. The goal in a label is to clearly communicate the dimension, or what is being measured, by the element, how it's being measured. And finally, always cite your data sources on your visualization or dashboard. Why? Because you want to be transparent with your users about where the data came from and possibly how it was collected. And you want to leave a trail for yourself and any colleagues that may be working on the project in the future. Now I'm going to demo how to use the MemLab network templates. First, I'll start with the Google Sheet template and then move into Data Studio. Here we see the MemLab appointments template. Down at the bottom, you see three different tabs: Template, Example, and Guide. So here at the top, I see my header, which has date, drop-in, AV appointments used, AV appointments unused, scan appointments used, scan appointments unused, total appointments used, total appointments unused, and total appointments available. On the Example tab, you can see that I've filled in some data. Note that any of the total columns use a formula for calculations. And you can copy this formula over by just copying, sticking it right in there. The last tab is a guide that explains each field with a description, the format, an example, and any notes. Okay, so I put some dummy data into this template so that we can play around with it. So next, I'm going to go to the MemLab Networks Analytics Report template. And to copy this report, I'm just going to click this Make a Copy of This Report icon and click it. And it's going to ask me, which data source do I want to connect to? I want to connect to the template that I just filled out. So I'm going to click this. I'm going to click Create a New Data Source. You can see I have all these different options of ways to add in data. So if you had a website that you were tracking, you could hook directly into Google Analytics. I can use Google Sheets. I can upload my own CSV file. There's lots and lots of options, but I'm going to use that Google Sheet. Going to pick my spreadsheet. I want to make sure that I have the right tab, which is template. I'm going to hit connect. Here I'm getting a preview of all of my fields, and I can see what it's interpreting it as. So I can see that I've got numbers, I've got date for date, I've got everything is correct here. If I needed to change one of these, I could hit the drop down and select a different type of data. But this looks good. So I'm going to click Add to Report. Okay, so now I'm going to make a copy of this templated report. Okay, so here is the original, and here's the copy that I made. So the first thing I'm going to do is to change the file name. I am going to say that this is the MemLab Analytics report for November 2020. So I've already got the year. I'm just going to add 11 and today's date, which is the 16th. Great, I can see that my new data set was successfully added to this report template, but I see a few things that I want to change. First of all, if I click in here, I can see that my metrics say scan app used, and that's true of this chart and this chart as well. And scan app use isn't going to mean anything to my users, so I want to change the way that that's appearing. If I go to my data source and click the little edit data source, I can see all my dimensions here. So I'm just going to go ahead and change these labels into something that's easier for me to understand. So for this first one, AV app unused, that's the number of AV appointments unused. So I'm going to change that to AV appointments unused. Go down to the second AV app used and change it to AV appointment used. I'm going to change scan app used unused to scan appointment unused and scan appointments used. Okay, I can already see up here those changes reflected. I think for now, that's all the changes that I want to make. Okay, next I'm looking at this, and I don't think that I want to see from January 2019 to November 2020. I just want to see what happened in 2020. So I can click this, and I am going to choose custom date range. Right now it's on auto date range, so it's showing me everything. But if I click this, I can make my start date January 1st, 2020, and my end date November 30th, 2020. Click apply, and now I can just see the numbers for 2020. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the AV appointments. So I'm just going to go to custom date range, change the start date to January 1st, 2020, and the end date to November 2020. There we go. Now I'm just seeing everything for 2020. I can pick whatever date range I want. So if I just wanted to see like the date range for a specific quarter, I could do that. The other thing that I want to change is this hasn't been updated since December 2019. That's not right. I want to see a comparison of November 2020 as compared to October 2020. First thing I'm going to do is update this label to November 2020. So I know this whole dashboard is going to be showing me information for November 2020. And now I'm going to click this, and I can see right here in the date, I can see that this is showing me the information for December 2019. So I'm going to go forward. I want to see November 2020. So my start date is November 1st, 2020. And my end date be November 30th, 2020, which even though it's in the future is fine. Okay. And then comparison. So I want to see what changed, how many more scan appointments were used as compared to October 2020. And right now it's just comparing to the previous period and it's telling me that there's no data. So I am going to set my own date. So I'm going to do October 1st, 2020 to October 31st, 2020. And there, I can see that that appointment use was up by 5% from October 2020. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the AV appointments used. So again, I'm going to change it from December 2019 to November 2020. And I'm going to change my comparison date to October 1st to October 31st. And I can see that AV appointments were down by 8%. Okay, the total appointments used by month. Again, I don't want to see everything from January 2019 to November 2020. I just want to see everything for 2020. So I'll go down, hit custom date range, start with January 1st. My end date will be November 30th, and apply. And last, I'm going to adjust my walk-ins. So I will pick January 1st, 2020 to November 30th and hit apply. Okay, now next say that I'm not really happy with this color scheme. I want to change it to match more with my library branding. That's easy to do. You click on the chart that you want to change, go into style, and I've got all these different options. So what if I want to see what the 100% stacking looks like? Oh, that doesn't work. That's okay. I can unclick it. What if I want to see the data labels? Click that. I can see that. I can just click it off. I don't really like green, so what if I want to change it to purple? Just click purple, and that's it. The best way to get to know these is to just play around with them. It's really easy to step back using the back arrow or forward, so it's really fun to play around with these. Let's pick a different color for this one. Okay, so here's the data tab, here's the style tab, and let's click this and we'll add the purple so that they match. And not really feeling this orange, so I'm gonna go to style, and I want to change the color to green. So you can see that it's pretty easy to play around with change things, but like I said, the best way to get to know this is really to just try different things, see what works and what doesn't work. Let's see that I want to see this walk-ins as a different chart style. So I can click this and just see what happens if I choose just a bar chart. That is a different way that I can see it, or I could do a bar chart this way. Once I am happy with what I see, I can click the view button. It'll give me a nice clean view of the entire dashboard. And when I'm happy with it and I'm ready to share it with my colleagues, I can click the share button and I have some different options. You can share just like you would with any other kind of Google product in Google Drive. That's one option. Or you can schedule to email the report to your colleagues. You can get a shareable link like you might have with other Google products, or you can download the report, which is usually the way that I share. So you just click download. There you go. Now you have a PDF that is ready to be sent out to whoever wants it. And that's the basics of how to use the MemLab Network template to fill in your data and create your own monthly report for your very own MemLab. Here are some resources that you might find helpful. The first is Data Visualization, a guide to visual storytelling for libraries. It's a great book that walks you through everything that we went through today in much more detail. The second is an Intro to Data Studio tutorial, which is put on by Google, that walks you through all the steps to using Data Studio to create your own visualizations. And the last is a step-by-step guide for data visualizations from Depict Data Studios. That's really great. That goes into much more detail than I did today on how to really set up beautiful data visualizations. And if you have questions about anything covered today, contact me at peoples.archive@dc.gov.
That was great. Now is the time for questions. I think I have just like a very weird specific one. When you were changing the scan app used to something that was more like human readable, really, that's just changing it on the report, right? It's not going back to the original.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, if you go back to the spreadsheet, that header will remain the same. That change was only made in Google Studio.
Okay, cool. I thought so. It's like, I know that they're connected, but
yeah, that's a good question. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And then, I mean, yeah, for this example of like monthly reports, I feel like the data visualization thing is really important. I could see this being used for, like we said, grant reporting too. If you have to report to a board or something like that. Yeah, I feel like this info could be, or this like implementation of data visualization could be used. Have you come across any other ways that it's been used at DCPL so far?
Yeah, I made a set of visualizations for one of our collections when they were having like an anniversary kind of party to kind of show how the collections had been used over the last several years. So that was kind of fun because we tried to get beyond the bar charts and make some things that are kind of like almost more have an artistic flair to them.
Mm-hmm.
So then they blew up big posters to display so that people could see how those collections have been used over the last several years.
Nice.
But yes, I know that things like this are used to share with the administration to help them understand what is going on in the department easily and to track things over time. And then they're also just used within our own department to help sometimes maybe like guide some decision making around what's working for reference or what's been working well for programming, what people want to learn more about, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like it's, it's good for outreach and it's good for understanding of information, like for especially folks that are more visual, which I am personally. Like, it's one thing to see a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet, but then once you see that compared to the rest, and in like, you can see the large and the smallness of it. And yeah, the comparison, that's huge. I love that, looking at the different months.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have for our website for our digital collections is a map of where in the world people are using our resources that updates on a rolling basis every day. And it's really cool to just like once a month or so spend some time to see the reach and the impact that your collections have. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a lot of ways that maps can also be very, very useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like, all of this info, I know it's probably more the quantitative stuff, right, that can be dumped into, and I mean, this is something too to think about in the labor aspect of this. Like, you have to collect this information and then like, yeah, you have to put it in these spreadsheets, like you said, that are following certain standards and stuff. I think it's probably like less the qualitative stuff
You can totally do stuff with the qualitative stuff, but it's more complex. And I would say that is more like when you get more comfortable with the basics, but that is one of the things that like analytics can help you do. So those, so writing scripts to recognize words and give you a count and that sort of thing, very, very doable. But it's definitely, once you get more comfortable with the basics, then that's something to reach for, because you can absolutely turn text into something that's very powerful.
Like maybe like a word cloud too, like, right?
Yes, yeah, and Data Studio does let you do like a very basic word cloud type thing, but there are lots of like good free things, applications out there that will allow you to do word clouds.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing that you have to think about when you're implementing this. How are you collecting the data? Is it, if it's a physical paper form, then you just have to realize that in order to be able to do any of this cool visualization and reporting and figuring out of trends, you have to enter it into computer readable language. And also you're gonna have to do that for me anyway. So, cause I need to have access to it. And yeah, so just kind of think about that labor. So maybe you wanna make it a Google form, but then you also wanna think about responsive, like who will actually fill it out and on a Google form versus a paper form. So yeah, Jonathan, do you have any questions? No questions, you don't?
I don't really have any questions. I just need to get familiar with the data studios, because like spreadsheets is not really my forte, but you know, I could make it work, or I just need to practice with it. The visual aspect, I have had experience with pulling data and then just kind of handing it to someone else and going, here, I want it to make it look dynamic this way, and I could do that. So I just need to kind of work with the data studios, I think. Yeah, because I know that we have to report. I've been given vague instructions for like, we've been collecting statistics for our any questions we receive, any requests, and you know, for using our collection. So we are collecting statistics for that. But I've been given kind of instructions like, okay, we just need it at the end of the year for the state. So I could definitely see collecting data for the memory lab just running concurrently with what we're already doing. Whereas I think maybe like other smaller archives may not have that practice. I don't know. Because you know, it seems like a lot of smaller like museums and things like that, and archives that, you know, they're just trying to get up to speed with what's in our collection. What are we, you know, are we going to digitize it? Are we going to catalog it, kind of stuff. So I guess I really don't have any questions. It's just more of the statistics you do need to collect, just because you need to have that data, so that way if let's say administration is going to change your hours, or they're going to change your hours of access or your level of staffing, you need to have those statistics, so that way you can prove to them people are using it. And it's not just the in-person services or the services by phone or by email, but even if you have digital collections online, you have access to those statistics. You need to have that too, so you can prove to them people are using them in all these different ways. Whereas in 30 years ago, it was very old school, and you know, come in and give them the stuff and they look at it and there's only one access point. Now you have 3 or 4 easily. So you do need to collect these statistics. I'm going to look at the data studios definitely, because right now I just have I think it's basically an Excel spreadsheet with that information.
Good, great. That's a great start. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the problem is more, not really a problem. It's just that one of my volunteers manages that, and they're doing a great job of it. But I can see that, you know, I know I can convert, you know, stats on Excel into, you know, bar graphs and pie charts. I've done that before. but it just seems like the Data Studios has more tools to work with.
Yeah, and the tutorial that Google created is very extensive, so that'll definitely like get you set up to be able to create your own stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the power of it is absolutely like the comparison, you know, which and just definitely seems prettier than Excel, like the things that they spit out too. And I mean, I do everything on spreadsheets anyway, so it's cool that you can just like link that up. And the Google Analytics, I didn't realize that, but that makes complete sense that you could just upload that into there. So cool. Well, I feel like I learned a lot. I definitely know that going into the Google Studio is like, and like working with it is absolutely the way that I learn as well, Jonathan. So have fun with it. And I'm going to follow up with lots of links, including the template that Laura made. So thank you, Laura, so much for making that and for making the video and being here today with us and all your work, helping me too with the DCPL Memory Lab and the reports coming out of that. So thank you. And thank you both for your time and for your attention. I appreciate it so much.